Jedediah was a man carved from the same granite as the mountains that framed his small farm. His face, a road map of wrinkles etched by sun and wind, rarely betrayed emotion. But his eyes, the color of a stormy sky, held a deep understanding of the land and the creatures that lived upon it. His closest companions were Bess and Clover, his two oxen. Each morning, before the sun peeked over the horizon, Jedediah would rise and tend to his animals. He'd fill their trough with fresh water, watching as they drank deeply, their breaths misting in the cold morning air. The sound of their rhythmic breathing, a soft, whooshing symphony, was as familiar to him as his own heartbeat. He could tell their mood just by the sound of their breath. A slow, steady rhythm meant contentment, while short, sharp puffs indicated impatience. The small fire he built each morning sent tendrils of wood smoke curling into the sky. The smell was a constant companion, clinging to his clothes and hair, a comforting reminder of warmth and home. He'd often sit by the fire, watching Bess and Clover graze in the nearby pasture, their dark shapes silhouetted against the pale dawn. He wasn't a talkative man, Jedediah. Some folks in the nearby town thought him strange, a hermit. But he wasn't lonely. He had the land, his oxen, and the quiet satisfaction of honest work. He understood the language of the wind rustling through the trees, the creak of the wagon wheels, the lowing of his oxen. These were the things that filled his days and his heart. One particularly cold morning, as the air hung heavy with the promise of snow, a wagon appeared on the road leading to his farm. It was a rickety thing, pulled by a horse that limped with every step. Jedediah watched as it drew closer, the driver's face etched with worry. The air grew thick with the scent of wood smoke from their small cooking fire, and the faint smell of sickness clung to the air around the wagon. Jedediah knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that this family was in trouble. As the wagon drew closer, Jedediah could see the mother's face clearly. Worry lines were etched deep around her eyes, and her breath came in short, shallow gasps that betrayed her exhaustion. Two small children huddled beside her, their faces pale and smudged with dirt. Their breaths, ragged and weak, mingled with the steam rising from the tired horse. The air around them carried the faint, acrid smell of sickness. "Mister," the mother called out, her voice hoarse. "Our horse, he's gone lame. We're trying to reach our homestead, but we'll never make it before winter sets in." She paused, her chest heaving. "The children, they're not well." All that Jedediah remained silent for a moment, his gaze sweeping over the family. He saw the worn clothes, the patched wagon, the sheer desperation in the mother's eyes. He could practically taste the dust and hardship clinging to them. He knew what it meant to struggle against the land, to feel the relentless pressure of survival. Bess and Clover shifted restlessly behind him, their warm breath puffing out invisible clouds. They seemed to sense the family's distress, their large, gentle eyes fixed on the struggling horse. Jedediah reached out and stroked Clover's broad forehead, feeling the coarse hair beneath his calloused hand. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he considered the situation, weighing the cost against the need. He knew what it meant to lend his oxen; it would set him back in his own work. But he also knew he couldn't turn a blind eye to their plight. The smell of wood smoke from the family's meager fire mingled with the crisp air, a stark reminder of the warmth and comfort they were desperately seeking. Finally, he nodded slowly. "I'll help you," he said, his voice rough from disuse. "Bess and Clover can pull your wagon." The mother's eyes widened with relief. "Oh, mister, thank you kindly." Jedediah simply gestured towards his oxen. "They're strong, they'll get you there." He watched as the family's faces lit up with hope. The little girl coughed, and her breath seemed to catch in her throat. Jedediah knew he had made the right decision. He couldn't let them face the coming winter alone. Jedediah wasted no time. He unhitched the family's lame horse, its breath coming in short, painful rasps. The poor creature lowered its head, its eyes dull with exhaustion. Jedediah led it to his barn, offering it fresh water and hay. He knew it would need time to recover. He then carefully hitched Bess and Clover to the wagon. The oxen were accustomed to pulling heavy loads, but Jedediah took extra care to ensure the harness fit comfortably, mindful of the family's precious cargo. He spoke to them softly, his voice a low rumble that seemed to soothe their patient souls. Their warm breath, smelling of hay and sweet grass, enveloped him as he worked. The mother watched him, her face still etched with exhaustion but now tinged with hope. The children, their coughing temporarily subsided, stared at the oxen with wide-eyed wonder. Jedediah could feel their anticipation, their desperate need to reach their new home. With a gentle nudge and a soft giddy up, Jedediah started Bess and Clover forward. The wagon creaked and groaned as it began to move, but the oxen pulled steadily, their powerful muscles bunching and releasing with each step. The family walked alongside, their breaths now coming a little easier, their faces turned towards the horizon. The air was filled with the rhythmic sounds of the oxen's hooves, the creaking of the wagon wheels, and the soft murmur of the family's voices. The smell of wood smoke from their small fire drifted back on the wind, mingling with the earthy scent of the damp ground and the clean, fresh air of the open countryside. Jedediah walked beside Bess, guiding her with a gentle hand. He watched the family closely, making sure they were keeping pace. He knew the journey would be long and arduous, but he was determined to see them safely to their destination. He felt a sense of quiet satisfaction in helping them, a warmth that spread through him despite the cold air. He knew that lending Bess and Clover was more than just an act of kindness. It was a connection forged between strangers, a bond built on shared hardship and the promise of a better future. He continued to walk, the smell of wood smoke fading behind them as they steadily progressed towards the horizon. The journey lasted several days. Jedediah guided Bess and Clover with unwavering patience, navigating the rough terrain and ensuring the family's safety. Each night, they would make camp by the side of the road, building a small fire to ward off the chill. The smell of wood smoke became a constant presence, a comforting aroma that mingled with the scent of pine needles and damp earth. Jedediah shared his meager supplies with the family, teaching them how to conserve their resources and how to read the signs of the changing weather. He observed the children closely, noting the subtle improvements in their health as they breathed in the fresh air and ate nourishing food. Their breaths, once ragged and weak, grew stronger and more even. The mother, whose name was Sarah, proved to be a strong and resourceful woman. She learned quickly, asking Jedediah questions about the land and the best ways to cultivate it. He admired her resilience, her unwavering determination to provide a better life for her children. She would often sit by the fire in the evenings, mending clothes and sharing stories with the children. The sound of her gentle voice, filled with hope and love, warmed Jedediah's heart. As they neared the family's new homestead, the landscape began to change. The rolling hills gave way to fertile valleys, and the air grew thick with the scent of wildflowers. The children, their faces glowing with excitement, pointed towards the distant fields, their breaths coming in happy bursts. Finally, they reached their destination. A small, weathered cabin stood nestled in a clearing, surrounded by towering trees. Sarah gasped, her eyes filling with tears. "This is it," she whispered, "our new home." Jedediah helped them unload the wagon, carefully placing their few belongings inside the cabin. He watched as the children ran through the fields, their laughter echoing through the valley. The smell of wood smoke curled from the cabin's chimney, a welcoming beacon in the vast wilderness. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the land, Sarah turned to Jedediah, her face filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "You saved us. We'll never forget your kindness." Jedediah simply nodded, his gaze fixed on the setting sun. He knew that he had done what was right. He had helped a family in need, and that was all that mattered. He turned Bess and Clover around, their warm breaths misting in the cool evening air, and began the long journey back to his farm. The smell of wood smoke from the family's chimney lingered in the air, a reminder of the bond they had forged and the hope that now bloomed in the valley. The years that followed settled into a rhythm as predictable as the changing seasons. Spring brought the scent of blooming wildflowers and the sound of birdsong. Summer was a time of long days spent tending his fields, the air thick with the buzzing of bees and the smell of sun-baked earth. Autumn painted the landscape in vibrant hues of red and gold, and the crisp air carried the scent of fallen leaves. Winter brought snow and ice and the quiet stillness of the land. Jedediah continued to work his farm, his days filled with the steady, comforting labor he knew so well. Bess and Clover grew older, their movements a little slower, but their bond with Jedediah remained as strong as ever. He still rose before dawn each morning to tend to them, listening to the rhythmic sound of their breathing and watching the vapor of their breaths in the cold air. But something had changed in the land. The summers grew hotter and drier, and the winters brought less snow. Distant wildfires became more frequent, their smoke staining the sky and filling the air with a constant, acrid smell. At first, the fires were small and contained, but as the years passed, they grew larger and more destructive. The smell of smoke became a familiar background note in Jedediah's life, a constant reminder of the growing danger. He would often stand on his porch in the evenings, watching the distant plumes of smoke rise against the setting sun. He knew that the changing climate was taking its toll on the land, and he worried about the future. He thought often of Sarah and her children, wondering how they were faring in their new homestead. He hoped that they were safe from the fires, that they had managed to build a life for themselves in the fertile valley. He remembered the sound of their laughter, the hope in their eyes, and he prayed that they would be spared from the devastation that was sweeping across the land. The wind shifted, bringing a stronger whiff of wood smoke, making his eyes water. He knew deep down that the fires were coming closer. The air tasted dry and hot, even in the cool evening. He felt a growing unease, a sense that his quiet life was about to be disrupted once again. The wildfire arrived not as a gradual threat, but as a furious, all-consuming beast. Jedediah awoke in the middle of the night to an orange glow that painted the sky. The air was thick, heavy with smoke that clawed at his throat with every breath. He could feel the heat radiating even from miles away, a palpable wave that pressed against his skin. The smell of burning wood was overpowering, acrid and suffocating. It was a smell that spoke of destruction, of loss, of the terrifying power of nature unleashed. He rushed outside, Bess and Clover already agitated in their pen. They pawed at the ground, their breaths coming in short, panicked bursts. Jedediah could see the fear in their eyes, the same fear that gripped his own heart. The sky was a swirling vortex of orange and black, illuminated by the flickering flames that danced along the horizon. Embers like fiery snowflakes drifted down from the sky, landing on the dry grass and igniting small, flickering fires. The roar of the fire was deafening, a constant, terrifying rumble that shook the very ground beneath his feet. It sounded like 1,000 angry voices, all screaming at once. The air shimmered with heat, distorting the landscape and making it difficult to see. Jedediah knew that this was no ordinary wildfire. This was a monster, a force of nature that threatened to consume everything in its path. He looked towards the valley where Sarah and her family had settled years ago. The orange glow was particularly intense in that direction. He felt a surge of fear, a cold dread that settled deep in his stomach. He knew that their homestead was directly in the path of the fire. The thought of them trapped, helpless against the flames, spurred him into action. He had to do something. He couldn't stand by and watch as their lives were threatened. The memory of Sarah's grateful smile, the sound of her children's laughter echoed in his mind. He knew he had to try to save them. He quickly made a decision. He would harness Bess and Clover to the sturdiest wagon he had, load it with water and blankets, and head towards the valley. It was a dangerous mission, a fool's errand perhaps, but he couldn't live with himself if he didn't try. He took a deep breath, the smoky air burning his lungs, and began to prepare. He knew that the odds were stacked against him, but he also knew that he had to try. For Sarah, for her children, for the memory of that small act of kindness years ago, he had to face the fire. The warm breath of Bess and Clover on his neck was the only comfort in that moment. The journey towards the valley was a descent into hell. The air grew thicker with each passing mile, the smoke stinging his eyes and making it difficult to breathe. Jedediah wrapped a wet cloth around his face, but it offered little relief. The heat was intense, radiating from the flames that licked at the edges of the road. He could feel it searing his skin, drying out his throat. Bess and Clover struggled to pull the wagon, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. Jedediah stopped frequently to let them rest, offering them water from the dwindling supply he carried. He poured water over their heads and backs, watching as the steam rose in the oppressive heat. He spoke to them in soothing tones, encouraging them to keep going. He knew that they were just as scared as he was, but they trusted him, and he couldn't let them down. The landscape was unrecognizable, transformed into a desolate wasteland of ash and charred trees. The smell of burning wood was everywhere, mingled with the sickening stench of burnt flesh. Jedediah saw the charred remains of animals along the road, a grim reminder of the fire's destructive power. Embers continued to rain down from the sky, igniting new fires along the way. Jedediah had to constantly be vigilant, stamping out the flames before they could spread. He used a shovel to clear the road of debris, pushing aside fallen trees and burning branches. The work was exhausting, but he couldn't afford to stop. Every minute counted. As he neared the valley, the fire intensified. The flames towered over the trees, casting an eerie glow on the smoke-filled landscape. The heat was almost unbearable, and the air was so thick with smoke that Jedediah could barely see. He knew that he was getting close, but he also knew that he was running out of time. The warm breath of Bess and Clover, usually a comfort, now felt hot and labored against his skin. He pressed onward, driven by a desperate hope that he would reach Sarah and her family in time. The roar of the fire was deafening, a constant reminder of the danger that surrounded them. He closed his eyes for a moment, picturing Sarah's face, and pushed on, knowing that their lives depended on him. Finally, he reached the clearing where Sarah's cabin once stood, or rather, where it had stood. Now, it was nothing more than a smoldering pile of ash and charred timbers. The sight stopped him cold, a wave of despair washing over him. Had he been too late, he scanned the surrounding area, his eyes searching for any sign of life. The air was thick with smoke, making it difficult to see, but he strained his eyes, desperate for a glimmer of hope. Then he saw them, two figures silhouetted against the flames, frantically trying to salvage what they could from the burning remains of their barn. They were men, no longer the small children he remembered. They were tall and strong, their faces blackened with soot, their clothes torn and singed. They coughed, their breaths ragged and desperate, as they fought to drag a heavy trunk away from the flames. Jedediah urged Bess and Clover forward, the wagon wheels crunching on the ash-covered ground. The men turned at the sound, their eyes widening in surprise. They recognized him instantly. "Jedediah," one of them shouted, his voice hoarse. "Is that you?" Jedediah nodded, his face grim. "Sarah is she." The men shook their heads, their faces filled with sorrow. "She passed a few years back," one of them said, "a fever." Jedediah felt a pang of sadness, but he pushed it aside. "There was no time for grief. We need to get out of here," he said. "The fire's getting worse." The men hesitated, their eyes fixed on the burning remains of their home. "We can't leave," one of them said. "We have to try and save something." "There's nothing left to save," Jedediah said, his voice firm. "Your lives are more important. Come on, get in the wagon." He watched as the men reluctantly climbed into the wagon, their faces etched with despair. They looked back at their burning homestead, their breaths catching in their throats. Jedediah knew that they were leaving behind everything they had ever known, but he also knew that he was giving them a chance to survive. He cracked the reins, and Bess and Clover began to pull the wagon away from the inferno. The smell of smoke clung to everything, a constant reminder of the devastation they were leaving behind. But as they moved away from the flames, a faint glimmer of hope began to flicker in the hearts of the two young men. They were alive, and that was all that mattered, for now. The escape from the fire was a desperate race against time. The flames chased them relentlessly, licking at the wheels of the wagon and sending sparks flying into the air. Jedediah urged Bess and Clover onward, their powerful legs churning through the ash-covered ground. The oxen coughed, their eyes watering from the smoke, but they kept pulling, their loyalty unwavering. Jedediah knew that their lives and the lives of the two young men depended on their strength. The air was thick with smoke, making it difficult to breathe. Jedediah kept the wet cloth pressed against his face, but it offered little relief. The heat was intense, searing his lungs with every breath. He could feel the sweat pouring down his face, stinging his eyes. The two brothers, Thomas and Caleb, sat huddled in the back of the wagon, their faces etched with grief and exhaustion. They watched as their home disappeared behind them, swallowed by the flames. The smell of burning wood filled their nostrils, a constant reminder of their loss. They were silent, their breaths coming in shallow, ragged gasps. As they moved further away from the fire, the air gradually began to clear. The heat subsided, and the smoke began to dissipate. Jedediah stopped the wagon by a small stream, allowing Bess and Clover to drink and rest. He offered the brothers water and some dried meat, but they refused, their appetites gone. They sat in silence for a long time, listening to the gentle murmur of the stream and the soft breaths of the oxen. The smell of smoke still lingered in the air, but it was less overpowering now. Jedediah knew that they were safe, at least for the moment, but he also knew that their journey was far from over. They had lost everything, and they would need to find a new place to call home. He looked at their faces, etched with sorrow and despair, and he knew that he couldn't leave them. He had helped them once before, and he would help them again. He would guide them, protect them, and give them the strength to rebuild their lives. The warm breath of Bess and Clover, resting peacefully nearby, was a reminder of the simple joys that still remained, even in the face of such devastation. He knew that together they would find a way to move forward. After a long silence, Thomas spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "What are we going to do, Jedediah? We have nothing left." Jedediah looked at the two young men, their faces etched with despair. He knew that they were feeling lost and hopeless, but he also knew that they had the strength to overcome this tragedy. He had seen it in their eyes, in their determination to save what they could from the fire. "You're not alone," Jedediah said, his voice firm but gentle. "I'll help you. We'll find a new place, a new home. We'll rebuild." The brothers looked at him, their eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. They had known Jedediah for only a short time, but they had already come to trust him. They knew that he was a man of his word, a man who would stand by them through thick and thin. "Where will we go?" Caleb asked, his voice trembling. Jedediah thought for a moment, considering their options. "I have some land further north," he said. "It's good land, fertile and well-watered. We can build a cabin there, plant some crops. It won't be easy, but we can make a fresh start." The brothers exchanged a look, their faces slowly brightening with hope. The thought of a new beginning, a chance to rebuild their lives, gave them a renewed sense of purpose. "We'll do it," Thomas said, his voice gaining strength. "We'll go with you, Jedediah. We'll work hard and we'll make something of ourselves." Jedediah nodded, a faint smile playing on his lips. He knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, but he also knew that they could overcome any obstacle as long as they had each other. They spent the night by the stream, resting and gathering their strength. The air was cool and crisp, and the smell of smoke had begun to fade. The gentle murmur of the stream and the soft breaths of the oxen lulled them to sleep. The next morning they set out towards the north, their faces turned towards the rising sun. Jedediah led the way, Bess and Clover pulling the wagon steadily behind him. The brothers walked alongside, their steps lighter now, their hearts filled with a newfound sense of hope. They knew that they had lost everything, but they also knew that they had gained something even more valuable, a second chance. The warm breath of Bess and Clover, a constant presence beside them, was a reminder of the simple joys that still remained and a promise of the brighter future that lay ahead. The journey was long, but they were not alone. The journey north was long and arduous, but Jedediah never wavered in his commitment to the brothers. He shared his knowledge of the land, teaching them how to hunt, how to fish, and how to identify edible plants. He showed them how to build a sturdy shelter, how to clear the land for farming, and how to protect themselves from the elements. Thomas and Caleb proved to be quick learners, eager to embrace their new life. They worked tirelessly alongside Jedediah, their initial grief gradually giving way to a sense of purpose and determination. They cleared the land, built a small cabin, and planted their first crops. As the seasons changed, the land began to yield its bounty. They harvested a bountiful crop of corn, beans, and squash. They caught fish in the nearby stream, and they hunted deer and rabbits in the surrounding forest. They had food to eat, a roof over their heads and each other. One evening, as they sat by the fire watching the sun set over the horizon, Caleb turned to Jedediah, his eyes filled with gratitude. "We never thanked you properly, Jedediah," he said, "for saving us from the fire, for giving us a new home." Thomas nodded in agreement. "We wouldn't be here if it weren't for you," he said. "You saved our lives not once but twice." He paused, his voice thick with emotion. "We'll never forget your kindness, Jedediah. You're like a father to us." Jedediah looked at the two young men, his heart filled with warmth. He had never had children of his own, but he felt a deep connection to Thomas and Caleb. He had watched them grow from frightened boys into strong, capable men, and he was proud of them. He simply nodded, his face betraying no emotion. "You're good men," he said. "You'll do well here." As the night deepened, they sat in comfortable silence, listening to the crackling of the fire and the gentle breaths of Bess and Clover, who were resting peacefully nearby. The smell of wood smoke mingled with the scent of pine needles and damp earth, creating a sense of peace and tranquility. Jedediah knew that they had finally found a place to call home, a place where they could rebuild their lives and create a lasting legacy. He looked at the two brothers, their faces illuminated by the flickering flames, and he knew that he had made the right decision. He had helped them, not because he expected anything in return, but because it was the right thing to do. And in doing so, he had found something even more valuable, a family. The warm breaths of Bess and Clover were the only witnesses to the quiet joy that filled his heart. After several months, Jedediah knew it was time for him to return to his own farm. Thomas and Caleb were capable men now, self-sufficient and confident. They had built a good life for themselves, and they no longer needed his guidance. One morning, as the sun began to rise, Jedediah hitched Bess and Clover to his wagon. He packed a small bag with provisions, his heart heavy with a mixture of sadness and pride. He walked towards the cabin where Thomas and Caleb were already awake, preparing breakfast. He found them standing by the fire, their faces etched with concern. They knew that he was leaving, and they were reluctant to see him go. "You don't have to leave, Jedediah," Thomas said, his voice pleading. "You're part of our family now. We want you to stay." Jedediah shook his head, his face betraying no emotion. "I have my own life to live," he said. "My own farm to tend to." He paused, looking at the two young men, his eyes filled with a deep affection. "You'll be fine," he said. "You're strong and you're resourceful. You don't need me anymore." He offered a few words of advice, reminding them to always be kind to their neighbors, to respect the land, and to never give up hope. He then turned and walked towards his wagon, Bess and Clover following close behind. Thomas and Caleb watched him go, their faces filled with sadness. They knew that they would never forget Jedediah, the man who had saved their lives and given them a new home. Jedediah climbed into the wagon, cracked the reins, and with a gentle flick of the reins, he urged Bess and Clover forward. The wagon wheels crunched on the dirt road, and he began the long journey back to his farm. He didn't look back. The smell of wood smoke clung to everything, his clothes, his hair, the wagon, even the air itself. It was a constant reminder of the fire, of the loss, and of the unexpected connections that had brought him to this place. As he traveled, Jedediah reflected on the cyclical nature of life. He had helped a struggling family years ago, and now he had helped their sons rebuild their lives after a devastating tragedy. He had witnessed both the destructive power of nature and the resilience of the human spirit. He had experienced loss and grief, but he had also found love and companionship in the most unexpected places. He thought of Sarah, her face etched with worry, her voice filled with hope. He regretted that he had never known her better, but he was grateful that he had been able to help her and her family when they needed it most. He thought of Thomas and Caleb, their faces blackened with soot, their hearts filled with sorrow. He was proud of the men they had become, their strength, their courage, and their unwavering determination to rebuild their lives. He knew that the world was a harsh and unforgiving place, but he also knew that there was goodness to be found, even in the darkest of times. He had seen it in Sarah's eyes, in Thomas and Caleb's hearts, and in the unwavering loyalty of his oxen, Bess and Clover. As he neared his farm, the sun began to set, painting the sky in vibrant hues of orange and red. The air was still thick with the smell of smoke, but it was less overpowering now. The rhythmic breathing of Bess and Clover was a comforting constant, a reminder of the simple joys that still remained. He knew that his life would never be the same. He had been touched by the lives of Sarah and her family, and he would carry their memory with him always. But he also knew that he had done what was right, and that he had made a difference in their lives. He arrived at his farm as darkness fell, the familiar sights and smells welcoming him home. He unhitched Bess and Clover, gave them water and hay, and watched as they grazed peacefully in the pasture. The smell of damp earth and wood smoke filled the air, a comforting reminder of his own simple life. He sat on his porch, watching the stars twinkle in the night sky, his heart filled with a quiet sense of peace. He had come full circle, back to where he had started, but he was no longer the same man he had been before. He had learned valuable lessons about life, loss, and the importance of human connection. He had helped others, and in doing so, he had helped himself. The warm breaths of Bess and Clover, a gentle symphony in the night air, were a testament to the enduring power of kindness and compassion. And as he drifted off to sleep, he knew that he would never forget the family he had helped, the fire that had changed their lives, and the unexpected connections that had brought them all together. The world smelled of smoke, but also of hope.